Hi, everybody. It's Marlene with Eerie News, and today is June 2nd, 2025, Monday, June 2nd, 2025. And let's start off with it's kind of a true crime, kind of historical mystery kind of story. It's an old Florida story. It's out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Deputy Oberlin and the Bootleggers. Adam Wenger Oberlin moved to Miami from Ohio in 1919. He invested in real estate and things went well. That is until 1921. Adam Oberlin lost his first wife in 1916, an event that affected him deeply. But on June 3rd, 1921, a marriage license was issued for Adam W. Oberlin, 62, and Ida Marie Kegg, 52. New city, new life, new wife. July 16, 1921, he accepted the position of Deputy United States Marshal in charge of the Miami District. He just lost an election for county sheriff, but he had a good track record in law enforcement that preceded him. In Canton, Ohio, he was known as the man who cleaned up Canton when he served as sheriff for 2 terms from 1909 to 1913. He had a reputation for fearlessness. He worked with anti-vice squads to wipe out gambling and liquor violations. He closed down saloons, including the famous gambling joint known as Myers Lake. He stopped Sunday racetrack betting and automobile racing. He eliminated the red light district, which was considered a menace. Afterwards, he was elected a member of the House and then served a term in the state Senate, which ended January 1918. Then he came to Miami and worked in real estate. Many of the local Miami citizens insisted on his appointment in an effort to enforce prohibition. He took his oath of the office on August 1st, 1921. He replaced John A. Moritz. Within a few days of taking the oath, he had to return 2 truckloads of liquor made up of 71 cases of scotch, Irish gin, and Bacardi rum to D.R. Armstrong. The liquor had been confiscated several months before at his Point View home on Southwest 2nd Street. This was the second time in 2 weeks that federal prohibition agents had to return liquor to Armstrong per an order from Judge Radin M. Call. Apparently something was up when 2 days later it was ordered that any seizures of liquor made by federal agents in Miami should be stored in the federal building under the supervision of Adam Oberlin instead of the Withers warehouse where they were normally held. By August 18th, Oberlin was making high-profile arrests. John Crossland, president and general manager of the J.G. Crossland Company and the Miami Fisheries Company, was arrested on the charge of conspiracy to defraud the government and violation of the National Prohibition Act. The arrest was believed to be an effort to end one of the largest single liquor activities being conducted in the United States, and that Crossland was one of the ringleaders. Described as an Atlantic City millionaire, Crossland denied any connection to the recent seizure of a booze-laden schooner from Atlantic City on August 2nd, which was under British registry. Inside were 1,400 cases of liquor. Strangely enough, a co-conspirator was H. Holden, who operated a beauty parlor in Miami. In the following days, warrants were served on smaller bootleggers working off the Florida coast. In the beginning of September, Oberlin was laid low, not by criminals, but by dengue fever. The raids against bootleggers didn't stop, though. A 50-gallon moonshine still was destroyed in a wooded area near DeBerry Sawmill, 8 miles west of Larkin. A copper outfit with fire still burning under the boiler was discovered, with 2 barrels of mash nearby, about 150 gallons of beer, and a can of potash. No arrests were made since the moonshiners left before they could be caught. James A. Allison, the wealthy owner of the Miami Aquarium Corporation, had a summer home in Indianapolis and would come down to Miami in his yacht Seahorse. In November 1921, he was arrested by Deputy U.S. Marshal Adam Oberlin on a charge of violation of the National Prohibition Act. He was placed under a $300 bond. Prior to this, Allison had been indicted in May by a grand jury for alleged ownership of 200 cases of intoxicating liquor seized at an apartment adjoining the Miami Aquarium, which Mr. Allison occupied personally. Strangely, within days of Allison's arrest in November, it was noted Adam Oberlin had not been seen for a week. Oberlin's automobile had been found a few days earlier on the Tamiami Trail, 12 miles west of Miami. Unexpectedly, the proprietor of Melrose Dairy, Joachim Fritz, presented notes amounting to approximately $10,000 that he claimed Oberlin owed him for land deals. According to statements made by Mr. Fritz, Oberlin had paid in cash for the deals in which they were associated. He had been pressing Oberlin for some time for a payment of $500 he had given him for the purchase of his vehicle. These stories later turned out not to be accurate, for in truth Oberlin was not blocked from his real estate deals. Oberlin was last seen leaving his home with the intention of getting a shave and then visiting his attorney E.B. Kurtz. He never made it to the barber shop. A few days later, authorities dragged the canal on the Tamiami Trail at a point opposite of where the auto was found. A fisherman who reported finding the car said it was driven to the point where it was left by a man who got out of the machine and walked due west into the Everglades. After he made this statement to the local sheriff, the federal authorities were trying to find him to verify what he had seen. W.J. Kegg, Oberlin's stepson, said he doubted this was a case of suicide, and there were no warrants pending that would have taken him out on the trail. A story was circulated about Oberlin disappearing from his former home in Canton, Ohio, during the World War following the death of his first wife in 1916. He was found working as a carpenter in a shipyard at Norfolk, Virginia, under an assumed name. The inference was unmistakable, which was Oberlin had a history of disappearing. On November 25th, the sheriff's forces gave up the search for Oberlin in the belief that he had suffered a lapse of memory and was still alive. While the search was being conducted for the missing deputy, the effort against the bootleggers continued. Crossland's partner, Dr. Holden, and the crew of the Henry L. Marshall were apprehended and arraigned in court in Trenton, New Jersey. Crossland, on his part, was making plans to leave for Bimini aboard one of his fishing vessels. W.J. Kegg, Oberlin's stepson, was sworn in as acting deputy marshal. On December 3rd, an anonymous source offered a $5,000 reward for any information in regard to the death of Adam W. Oberlin, if murdered. The ad printed in the local newspapers and specified, quote, "We will guarantee protection to any information and his name will not be used in any way," end quote. Perhaps all the rumors that Oberlin had committed suicide or had a mental lapse and headed back to Ohio where his 5 children lived seemed an improbable explanation for his disappearance. Days later, the federal authorities were perplexed over the identity of who made the offer for the $5,000 reward. The ad had been signed only with the initials AWO, and the address given was 232 Republic Building. The existence of the offer only came to their attention after a reporter for the Miami Metropolis called the Department of Justice. The address specified belonged to the office of H. Paul Prague, who owned a for-rent post office lockbox at the Republic Building. He told police the week before a man whose name he was not at liberty to give out, owing to the privacy with which he operated his service, secured a box and the mail, and that it should be handled under the initials of AWO. Deputy Keogh denied his mother had made any such offer, and in fact she had been hospitalized due to the grief of her husband's disappearance when she suffered a nervous breakdown. The ad for the reward was reprinted on December 5th, 1921. On December 8th, L.W. Shaw, resident of Georgia, filed suit for $10,000 in damages against Deputy Oberlin and his former real estate partner, Joachim Fritz. On December 28, 1921, Seminole guides and Everglade hunters searching for Oberlin found his body 3 miles from where he left his automobile. Between the legs of the decayed corpse, which was only a skeleton, a revolver was found, which Oberlin carried as a government official. His hat, coat, and other belongings were tied up in a handkerchief and found hanging on the branches of a nearby bush. He had a number of letters and telegrams addressed to him in his coat pocket, but there was no suicide note. Buzzards and wild animals had been at the body. Authorities said that Oberlin had been careful to conceal his tracks, and if not for the expertise of the trackers in the party, he would not have been discovered. The body was found on a small island, a clump of bushes rising above the level of the marshes. One had to traverse a ridge of myrtle bushes over a mile in length. The spot was about 18 miles from Miami. It was believed the worries over financial matters caused him to commit suicide. This was despite the claims of his family that he appeared always in good spirits. However, this theory was turned on its head when no bullet hole could be found in the skull, though two cartridges had been discharged. A triangular shaped fracture at the top of the skull, which was at least 2.5 or 3 inches in width, was found. Some of the members of the coroner's jury thought it had been made by some blunt instrument. The skull hung by a thread of dried flesh to the body, which was lying on its back, sprawled out, with the trousers and shirt in shreds from exposure to the elements. The guides who found the body testified that only one set of tracks could be found to where the corpse was discovered. It was on the strength of their statement that the theory was upheld that Oberlin took his own life. Supposedly, the trail leading to the body was found after someone in the search party shot at a wildcat and while chasing it, crossed over the faint trail left by Oberlin over a month before. Once they found the hammock where the trail led, the Indians refused to enter owing to a certain superstition concerning dead bodies. The autopsy found that Oberlin had shot himself through the mouth or eye, and the bullet fractured his skull, where it was later found deeply embedded in the skull. His stepson reiterated that he never showed an indication that he was suicidal, and that his finances were not in a tangled condition. Quote, his assets were greater than his liabilities, and he could easily obtain loans necessary to conduct his business. End quote. Authorities claimed the land was flooded up to a short time before, which was the reason the searchers had not found the trail before, as they searched the section right after Oberlin's disappearance. The exhaustion of county funds available for the search was stopped until the return of Leon Howe, special agent of the Department of Justice, who immediately renewed the search. On December 31st, the coroner's jury decided that Oberlin's death was caused by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A year later, despite the decision of the coroner's jury, there were persistent rumors that Oberlin had been murdered by men engaged in illicit traffic in liquor and that he had been lured to the spot where his body was found. Ida Oberlin refused to believe her husband a suicide, and after the body was sent to his former home in Ohio, she had it examined by physicians who reported he had been struck on the head by a blunt instrument. 2 years to the month after Oberlin's body was discovered, John G. Crossland was convicted in Trenton, New Jersey on a charge of conspiracy to violate the Federal Prohibition Act. Eventually, he was sentenced to only 2 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. For years after Oberlin's death, his stepson, W.J. Cogg, continued to arrest bootleggers. Ida Oberlin died in 1932. And the question begs to be asked. Did Adam Oberlin commit suicide just months after marrying and securing a job as a U.S. Marshal? Or did he cross powerful men engaged in bootlegging who were aware of his reputation in Ohio and that he intended to do the job he had been hired to do? What do you think? Do you think this guy, within weeks of marrying, accepting the position, which by the way he had run for sheriff and he had been defeated, but he became a U.S. Marshal, that he's just supposedly going to run into financial problems because of land deals and be be ready to kill himself? And you have to understand, back then bootleggers were very powerful, especially here in Miami, because in Miami became a dry county 6 years before the rest of the country. So in other words, bootlegging, moonshining, uh, rum running and stuff in from Bimini, that had been going on way even before prohibition was made a national law. So there was a system, and as you can see, movers and shaker like Crossland, like James Allison, these were all wealthy people, all right, with connections. And it makes you think that I don't know much about the prior sheriff or whoever was in charge of it, But it makes you think he was in on the take maybe, and now this guy came in and they said within months, whoop, he up and kills himself. So what do you think? Good question, huh? Sounds to me, I don't know, but I have a feeling he was done away with. Just one of those things. Just one of those things. Our next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Forgotten Pet Cemeteries. Long forgotten, mostly hidden in corners of old cemeteries, are memorials to the most beloved of companions. No doubt by now these pets have been reunited with those who grieved over their tiny graves so many years ago. First cemetery is Hyde Park. Behind the perimeter of Hyde Park Cemetery's gate on Bayswater Road, hidden by bushes in Victoria Gate Lodge, is a small plot of land memorializing the smallest companions. It all started with a kindness of Mr. Winbridge, the lodge keeper, in 1881. Cherry, a Maltese terrier who belonged to the Barnard children who lived at 10 Cambridge Square, died of old age. The family were already acquainted with the Victoria Lodge gatekeeper. The family asked to bury her inside the park, and a tombstone was placed over a tiny grave inscribed with "Poor Cherry, died April 28, 1881." The Barnards went on to bury two other dogs there, Kaiser in April 1886 and Zoe, whose inscription read, "Alas, poor Zoe, born October 1st, 1879, died August 13th, 1892." As deeply mourned as ever dog was mourned for friendship rare by her adorned. Many of the pets were victims of the horses and carriages that frequented the park. After Cherry, the second pet was one who lost his life this way. His name was Prince, a Yorkshire Terrier belonging to Louisa Fairbrother, wife of Prince George, Duke of Cambridge. Soon other burials followed, and Mr. Winbridge made sure to lay out the graves in neat rows, where the family would come later and decorate them with flowers. It ended in 1903 with over 300 graves nestled in a little corner of the park. Then the other cemetery, this is in French, Cimetières des Chiens et autres animaux domestiques, which translates to the cemetery of dogs and other domestic animals, which opened in 1899 at 4 Pont de Clichy on Ile de Ravageur, a suburb of Paris. The creation of the necropolis started when Paris declared that pets had to be interred in graves at least 100 meters from the nearest dwelling. Prior to this, animal carcasses were being dumped in the Seine or the household trash. Journalist Marguerite Durand and attorney George Harmois, both animal lovers, came up with the idea of the pet cemetery in what was then the outskirts of Paris. Marguerite's pet line was eventually buried there. Fast forward 125 years, and 40,000 animals found their final resting place in this cemetery. It's not only dogs and cats, but horses, hamsters, birds, fish, a lion, a monkey, among others. It catered to elite pet owners who memorialized their pets with ornate sculptures. Rin Tin Tin died in 1932 and was buried at Cimetière des Chiens et Autres Animaux Domestiques. He was rescued as a shell-shocked pup found in the French trenches during World War I by Corporal Lee Duncan, an American soldier who called him Rinty. In September 1918, Duncan arrived in the French village of Fleury to find out if the area would be suitable as a flying field. The place had been bombed and hit by artillery fire. He found a damaged kennel where German shepherd dogs bred for the Imperial German Army were kept. Inside was a starving mother with a just delivered litter of pups. He brought them back to his unit, the 135th Aero Squadron. Once weaned, he gave the mother to an officer and three of the litter to other soldiers, but kept a male, Rin Tin Tin, and female, Nanette, for himself. He considered them good luck based on the story told to soldiers that Rin Tin Tin and Nanette were lucky lovers who survived bomb attacks. In 1919, after the war, Duncan sneaked the dogs aboard a ship and arrived in Long Island, New York. Nanette contracted pneumonia and died. Duncan left to California with Rinty and Nanette too, who he got to replace the original Nanette. His first starring role was in the 1923's Where the North Begins. This film was a huge success and has often been credited with saving Warner Brothers from bankruptcy. He went on to star in 27 Hollywood films. Duncan was so devoted to his dog that his wife filed for divorce, naming Rin Tin Tin as co-respondent. The published report stated her feeling that Duncan loved the dog more than he loved her. The case was later dropped and the divorce not granted. Rin Tin Tin's descendants went on to star in many films. At the park's entrance is a monument to Barry the Menschredder. No, I'm sorry, Menschenschredder, which means people rescuer in German. At this time, Barry was not recognized as a St. Bernard, but instead as an Alpine Mastiff and weighed about 100 pounds. He worked as a rescue dog in Switzerland and Italy for the Great St. Bernard Hospice. One of his most noticeable rescues involved finding a lost child and warming him by licking his face and hands before carrying the boy on his back to safety. He saved more than 40 people and was 14 years old when he died in 1814. Contrary to legend that he was killed during his last rescue, in truth he was retired to Bern, Switzerland 2 years before he died. A taxidermist preserved him and he's on display at the Natural History Museum of Bern. Barry's stuffed remains were restored in 1923. At the hospice, one dog is always named Barry in his honor. Dogs were being used at the hospice at least since 1707, when a mention was found in the records that stated a dog was buried by us. They were originally introduced to the monastery sometime after 1660 as watchdogs. Examination of old skulls show that two types of dogs were kept, but by 1800 a special breed was being used for rescue work. France classified the cemetery as a historical monument in 1987. And a lot of people asked, the owners returned Rin Tin Tin to France because he was taken from France, even though some people couldn't understand why after his death he was returned. But supposedly, that's the reason why. And but he had a lot of apparently they made money, to have offsprings from Rin Tin Tin, legit offspring, I mean. And they went on to star in other movies, as they made a lot of many movies with that theme. Next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, is titled In the Shadow of Black Mountain. In Kalkajaka National Park, 16 miles southwest of Cooktown in Queensland, Australia, black granite boulders create a maze that lead inside Black Mountain. Throughout the years, it has developed a reputation for strange sightings and the disappearance of people without a trace. 250 million years ago, magma solidified and created giant boulders that measure as much as 20 feet across and tower 1,000 feet in height. The pile of boulders extend for 2 miles. A primeval forest surrounds it. Sunlight heat the surfaces of the black boulders, and cool rain fractures them, sometimes in a sudden explosion. Hot air moves through passages from the mountains and fill the space around the rocks. Strange noises accompany the heated air, as well as a nauseous stink. The Kuku Nyunkul indigenous people knew it was a place to avoid, and folklore surrounding it has always been ominous. They called it Kalkajaka, which translated as the Mountain of Death, or the Place of the Spear. They believed demons and evil spirits inhabited this place. These beings hungered for human souls. One of them was known as the Eater of Flesh, a medicine man who was seduced by darkness. This is a story according to an interview with a local named Peter. Quote, back in the age when the human race was young, there dwelt among the tribe in the vicinity of the mountain range a terrible medicine man whose name meant Eater of Flesh. So great was his craving for human flesh, and so great was the dread the superstitious tribesmen felt before his powerful magic, known to spirit away even a strong man, that they sometimes allowed him to eat an old woman or a diseased tribesman. One day, however, being very hungry, he overstepped his boundaries and partook of a young chief whom he found asleep. Caught in the act, the tribe rose up against him, but an evil spell helped him change into a monstrous snake. Hissing away, he made his home in the very heart of the barren and desolate Black Mountain. Only hunger could drive him out. Ever since then, people as well as animals have been disappearing there. End quote. Aboriginal people, until this day, steer clear of it, as do animals and birds. But it's not only the native people who tell of strange encounters. In modern times, there are stories describing disruption of navigational equipment experienced by some who traverse the Bermuda Triangle. Pilots take steps to avoid the area. There are also reports of strange lights and UFO activity. Many wonder if deep under the Black Mountain are alien bases and lost civilizations. The extraterrestrials who live here are said to be reptilian humanoids who claim human beings as slaves. Stories circulate of a giant python that attacks humans, as well as something called the Queensland tiger that is blamed for cattle death and mutilations. However, the strangest phenomena is the disappearance of people and animals. Herds of cattle appear to be swallowed by the mountain, and no trace is found of hikers and others who have vanished into air. Tales are told of an entire Aboriginal tribe trying to take shelter from enemies who made the same fatal mistake of seeking refuge there. Philip Graynor, in July 1872, was on his way to the Palmer River with a pack horse team loaded with provisions. He camped with other carriers near Black Mountain. That night, three of his horses broke loose and headed toward the mountain. At dawn, he set out to look for them in the direction of Black Mountain and was never seen again. Hours later, three carriers went in search of him. All they found was Grainer's horse grazing close to the pile of granite slabs. The next day, police and trackers searched the area for miles, but with no success. Many feared he fell into one of the crevices between the boulders. The second disappearance involved Sugarfoot Jack, a bushranger and criminal who fled into the Black Mountain with his gang. The authorities followed them, but the three men seemed to have disappeared into thin air, and no trace was found of any of them. The Black Mountain appeared to be the favorite destination of fugitive criminals. About 13 years after Sugarfoot Jack's disappearance, a constable from Cooktown, which lies about 14 miles southwest of the mountain, tracked one to the mouth of a cave. Constable Ryan, accompanied by other trackers, could not find any more clues of the man they sought, but not willing to let the man slip away, Ryan went into the cave after him. Neither man was ever seen again. These were not the last to disappear when entering the Black Mountain. Wren, a gold prospector, went missing. In November 1882, Harold Owens, a local man who settled in the Oakey Creek district, went in search of either stray cattle or horses. Like those before him, he disappeared. Police and trackers, accompanied by family members, made an exhaustive search of the mountain and the surrounding vicinity. In this case, not even Owen's horse was found. In the middle of the search, another man was reported missing. It was George Hawkins, better known as Red-Faced George. He had a club foot, and in December 1882 he left the 4 Mile district and rode toward Black Mountain. His aim was to find out if there was any feed for cattle in the locality, since he planned to buy land there. He knew about Owen's disappearance, but took little notice, declaring the man had just gotten lost, even though Owens was an experienced bushman like him. Hawkins rode along Palmer River Road where he met other travelers. He was last seen riding in the direction of Black Mountain. Settlers, miners, carriers, and natives from the district joined in a search for Hawkins, who had failed to return from his trip. 2 policemen were sent out to find Owens and Hawkins. They entered one of the caves, but only one emerged. Reports at the time described that he was crazed by what he experienced while in the cave. Only after several weeks was the search abandoned. The following year, the bones of a deformed human foot was discovered by a hunter near the base of the mountain. Many believed the bones belonged to Hawkins, but had no way to prove it. In 1892, most of the population had left due to the production of the Palmer River goldfield coming to a standstill. However, with the discovery of rich tin deposits, a rush of miners returned to the area. One of the first was named James Wren, a veteran miner. During August 1892, he had been working a field for several months and decided to spend a week in Cooktown. He left Friday morning and returned on Monday in the company of another miner. His companion stayed behind at a small bush hotel along the Palmer River Road. Wren was seen about 2 p.m. by 3 miners, traveling to Cooktown on the same road. These men were the last to lay eyes on him. When the miner who had stopped at the hotel arrived at Rossville the following day, The word got out that Wren had not arrived. Again, a search party was organized, and for over a month, efforts were made to find him. However, neither hide nor hair of Wren or his horse were found. Even the native trackers, who were very adept, could find a sign of what happened to the man. 35 years passed, and the Cooktown district became a ghost town. The mining fields were abandoned, and the Palmer River Road remained unused. Not all the miners that disappeared remain unfound. On November 27, 1900, the bones of a prospector named Killane were unearthed. There were indications he was killed and eaten by the natives. Not put off by this history of strangeness, in the 1920s, two European cave explorers took up the challenge of Black Mountain. They wanted to solve the enigma of the caves, and became part of it, as well as two native trackers sent to look for them. None could account as to the fate of any of the men. In 1928, G. Packer, a prospector, went missing. One of the researchers was attracted by flies, and inside a shallow fissure between two granite slabs was Packer's decomposed body. His rifle was with his body, and he had a bullet wound in his head. Nearby was his prospecting equipment. The verdict was suicide. Nevertheless, the natives believed he had been killed by the devils that lived in the mountain. In 1932, Harry Page, who went hiking, was later found dead from unknown reasons. This was the only time a corpse was produced, and despite intensive police investigations, no explanation could be produced as to what happened to all these people. None returned to tell what they saw. In 2009, a cave explorer described an experience he had while camping at Black Mountain. Quote, around 10 o'clock, a strong wind picked up, and down from the treetops came a cracking sound. We crawled inside the tent, lay down on our mats, and stared at the dark fabric, straining to hear every possible sound. The nighttime cries of the primeval forest were frightening at first, full of odd wails mingled with horrific laughter and the occasional crunch of a branch broken off by the wind. It was enough to make your soul shiver, but little by little we got used to it and began to fall asleep when a sudden hush fell over everything. Not only did the wind cease, but the voices of animals and night birds were gone. The silence was deafening. Danny and I looked at each other in surprise. We began joking, saying it must be the boogeyman, when we heard stone crumbling from the rock above us, as if something was slowly crawling out of the mountain. It sounded quite close, and we thought it might be an animal, maybe a rock wallaby. But once it climbed all the way down, what we heard from the bushes and dried up leaves was the sound of human steps. A crawling animal would not sound like this. This was clearly a human walking. Let's see who it is, whispered Danny, reaching for a flashlight. Wait, I stopped him. I bet it's hard to see our black tent. Maybe he won't notice it and leave. To be honest, I was scared and didn't want to call any unnecessary attention to us. After all, we were foreigners in the wilderness without a permit to build a tent by a holy site. By now the steps were definitely headed for us, as if someone knew very well where we were. Heart in my throat, I automatically gripped the handle of a long hunting knife. The prowling footsteps began to circle the tent. Let's go for it, cried out Danny, unzipping the tent with a jerk. I jumped out after him, with a flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. The oval reflections of our flashlights pierced through the spots from which the sounds had come. A formless dark mass, undulating by the grim wall of black bushes and trees, quickly dissipated. An ominous silence set in. True, no one was attacking us, but we heard no evidence of a person or animal escaping. All was still. We were completely baffled. Carefully, we searched all around our tent for possible traces and called into the dark forest, but to no avail. Dead silence was our only answer. We crawled back inside, ready to run out again at the slightest provocation, but we no longer joked about demons. Life returned to the primeval forest, and so did its nighttime music, which we knew by now to be harmless. Even so, I couldn't fall asleep until dawn. My dreams were chaotic, full of fear before the evil powers emanating from the bowels of the Black Mountain, and full of images so vivid that I had a hard time separating them from reality. I was progressing down a long corridor, straight into the mountain's heart. I ended up in a square chamber, its floor strewn with curiously long skulls, with a blue and red checkerboard painted all over them. We woke up to the sound of the car horn and human voices. It was 8 in the morning and our friends were waiting for us on the road. They said they had returned to the mountain last night and watched it with binoculars. They reported seeing flashing lights. So, what do you think? Yes, apparently this area it was sparsely populated even though there were miners out there. And yes, you could say, well, some people got hurt, you know, and nobody could find them. But even the Aboriginals who were there already had like, this is not a good place. I don't know. All right, story is from USA Today, and it's titled "A Tsunami That Never Ends." Study highlights a looming West Coast risk. The pressure keeps building below the Earth's surface off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, and a multi-layered disaster could strike at any time. A huge earthquake is brewing along the Cascadia subduction zone that could destroy bridges, reshape the landscape, and trigger a massive tsunami. Scientists have known about the looming danger for years, but ongoing research keeps painting a clearer picture of what could happen. Among the dangers, a huge tsunami that will wash over coastal areas and permanently flood them. The quake is a matter of when, not if, said Tina Dura, a geologist and professor of natural hazards at Virginia Polytechnic Institute in Blacksburg, Virginia. Geologically speaking, we're well within the window of possibility, she said. Dura was the lead author on a new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, focused on how climate change is increasing the potential impact of such an earthquake on coastal areas that may suddenly sink. Researchers expect the quake will trigger in as much as a 6-foot drop in some inland areas, and a massive tsunami will flood those regions, some permanently. Imagine if after Hurricane Katrina, after all the horrible things that happened, if we'd also lost big chunks of New Orleans and it never came back, said Diego Melgar, a professor at the University of Oregon and director of the Cascadia Region Earthquake Science Center. The loss of swaths of land is just one of the surreal series of events that will occur when the earthquake eventually strikes, researchers say. This is a mix of bad and good news. The quake is a certainty, but could be hundreds of years off. While it could happen at any time, seismologists have estimated there is a 15% probability of a magnitude 8 in the next 50 years, a substantial risk for such a devastating scenario. We can't predict exactly when the next Great Cascadia earthquake will occur. It could be tomorrow or decades from now, said Dura. Part of their confidence comes from the history of huge earthquakes in the region. The last event was in 1700, and paleoseismic records show these earthquakes recur roughly every 200 to 800 years. By 2100, there is a 30% chance of a larger earthquake happening, Dura said. Scientists have a clear picture of what will happen when the earthquake strikes. First would come extremely strong shaking that makes it difficult to stand or walk. This will probably last a minute or longer, says Melgar. Next, land along the coast would drop as much as 6.5 feet in places, probably within minutes. Then there would probably be 30 to 40 minutes of seeming peace. But that's a false impression, because a tsunami is coming, he said. The resulting waves would be on the order of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that killed nearly 230,000 people. The tsunami wave from an earthquake of this size could get to 90 or 100 feet tall. When a tsunami wave arrives at the shore, you get this massive surge that lasts for hours, sometimes days. This is, no, I don't agree with it. Two things play a part in creating the catastrophe, there's research described. First, the land would have dropped as much as 6 feet. At the same time, this means that water which rushes in will cover more land. You hope the tsunami could come to shore, then flow out again, and the land would dry out. But there will be parts where it's now below sea level. The water won't flow back. A Great Cascadia earthquake could instantly expand flood zones and double flood exposures for residents structures, and roads. When combined with rising sea levels, these effects could render some coastal communities permanently uninhabitable. Even if some areas along the coastline do dry out, they will be much closer to sea level and become susceptible to nuisance flooding if there's a particularly big storm or high tide. The west coast is subject to numerous small earthquakes all the time, but they're not big enough to relieve the pressure that's being built up along the Cascadia fault line. So much energy has built up in the zone that even a magnitude 8 earthquake wouldn't relieve it. Remember, the magnitude scale is logarithmic, so each increase in magnitude is an increase of 30 in terms of energy. The Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was a magnitude 8 trembler, and it was devastating. If we had one magnitude 8 quake here, we'd still have 29 to go to relieve the pressure. Wow. I don't know. You know, if everybody's always heard, of an earthquake along the West Coast. And personally, I don't think it has anything to do with climate change. This is just that something. This is earthquake driven. This is something that happens underneath the surface of the earth, of the plates. But it looks like what would be affected would be the coastlines along Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, southern end of the state of Washington. I don't know. And then again, it could, if, in other words, they're saying not if and when. I don't know. I'd be putting my house up for sale or for relocating because that could happen without any type of warning. Something to think about, huh? So anyway, I will be back with you guys soon with more interesting eerie news. Till next time, take care.